We must begin thinking like a river if we are to leave a legacy of beauty and life for future generations. David Brower.
During the past year, 19 individuals came together to explore what diversity looks like in the classroom and how to infuse it into their specific curriculum. Here is a narrative of their thoughts and perceptions, what they did in their courses, the lessons they wanted their students to learn, as well as their overall realizations. Like any dynamic, fluid life experience, there were unexpected hurdles to resolve, stories to be shared, and moments of inspiration to celebrate.
I chose to participate in this project because a semester before I had participated in a book reading project that was still talking about infusing diversity across curriculum through the reading and sharing what we thought. But at the end of it, we got together and there was a lot of sharing of resources that people could use, and people said, where do we go from here?
When we began our journey of infusing diversity into our campus, this is what we thought, felt, and believed.
Diversity is a really integral part of education today, and so I need to not only infuse diversity into my own curriculum, but because I teach future teachers, hopefully they in turn will then see the importance of infusing diversity into their own curricula.
Because I grew up in an all-white community, and with the exception of a few different ethnicities, and I came to find as growing up I had such an ignorance towards different cultures and race, and I had the fear of coming across as a racist. Mainly because I didn't understand the differences, and being a part of this project I wanted to understand or change my perspectives.
I have lived in other cultures in another country, and the experience was so invaluable to me. And I think for young people in our society, the more they can interact or emerge into another culture and experience that, I think we need to help our students learn to welcome those opportunities.
There were hurdles along the journey.
It's really very difficult to connect what we would like to do with what we're being asked to do structurally in our courses, and to make radical changes in our pedagogy and our content when some of us are actually quite timid when it comes to disrupting the status quo.
So at first I wasn't sure what the overall goals of the project was, and one of my concerns was that it would just be kind of a superficial celebration of diversity, just for the sake of, of diversity. But I was really pleasantly surprised to see an emphasis on questions of difference and questions of power, and understanding problems such as racism and sexism, and how we can use education to cultivate more of a critical understanding of these issues.
Students or prospective teachers need to be prepared to deal with the increasing diversity of students with exceptional learning needs. Schools have been historically driven by values such as time, discipline, achievement, and standards. And teachers nowadays, probably much more than any other time in history, are finding themselves having to meet these standards while working with individual students to accommodate their educational and behavioral needs. And of course, this could mean a student with disabilities, students from underserved culture, race, language, or socioeconomic status. What is unfortunate in this process is that diversity is becoming a predictor of success and failure in the classrooms.
What we did along the journey.
One of the projects that we're going to do in this class is not only exploring race in the context of the United States, but looking at questions of race in Latin America as well. And I want to look at it from a cross-cultural perspective so that students can kind of step out of their own assumptions about what race is supposed to mean. From an anthropological perspective, race is a social invention. It's an idea or an ideology that has been around for a long time and has become very taken for granted in how we understand difference and groups of people and things like that.
The course that I'm working on really has 3 units in it, and I was thinking about putting a small piece of diversity into each one of those components. In the first component, which is really an introduction to lodging, we talk about jobs, we talk about the industry in general, and we use a lot of videos. And I want the students to be able to use those videos and identify stereotypical roles of people in the hospitality industry.
And then I'm planning during their discussion sections to have about 4 different readings from a single other culture that deal with different aspects of how people interact with plants. So how they interact with them medicinally, how they interact with them in terms of environmental degradation, etc.
In my class, in the quality management courses, I introduce the different culture and different motivation strategies to my students. What's the culture differences, how to utilize our culture to get that advantage back. So we talk about these issues in class, and this is our future workforce, our students going to work in our industries to try to get the advantage back.
There's a couple ways I want to do that, and one is to engage the students in what I call like case studies, where I introduce a topic, and they'll be in small groups, and then they'll actually try to solve an issue in diversity, and then share it with the class. But then I also want to do a larger project that involves like a group paper, where a discussion group participates in a paper with research, and they actually will be researching packaging and how it affects a certain society in a certain country. That'll be identified by the instructor. So.
And the students are basically going to look at different diseases and the rates of their incidence, their frequency, and correlate it to how much money is being spent on their research to see whether there's a discrepancy between diseases that affect minority races and how much funding goes into them, and diseases that affect the majority of the population in certain countries, to see how much funding is going towards those.
Lessons that we wanted students to learn.
I tried to deal with difficult situations in my classes before by making people stick to talking about history and talking about the documents, and that this isn't about emotion, it's not about whether or not you like it. But what I've really learned over time is that there's the understanding of the content matter, but if they don't get to talk about their emotions, they don't really get it. So what I've been doing through this workshop is coming up with different assignments in which students can have personal reflections and struggle with some of the difficult issues that the course content brings up.
So as faculty, we were asked to get to know thyself, or get to know ourselves in terms of our gender, our class, our cultural backgrounds, and have a sense of where we fit in the broader spectrum. And so I can easily relate my experience to my students and ask them to do the same. So my hope is that through reading interviews with a variety of artists and painters about their process, about how their culture and backgrounds, whether it be gender or class, inform their work, that as Midwestern artists, that these students are going to leave this institution not being afraid to raise questions, not being afraid to have these conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable, and to welcome that discomfort.
And I also want them to have more sense about participating in creating the kinds of communities that they want to be a part of. So often these issues are seen as, those people, their problems, that group, And so I want students to have a sense about, oh, what kind of community do I want to live in, and how do I participate in creating that?
Reaching our journey's destination, we realized
the thing that has impacted me the most is the way in which the faculty members are very receptive to altering their perceptions and thinking very broadly and in a more inclusive way. The number one issue that I found that's been a thread and related, it's a kind of thematic statement for all of my faculty members over the year, is that they never had an opportunity to be engaged in this type of outside thinking. And so for me, I think that's had the most significant impact, that if we can approach the subject and broach it and talk about it openly, people are willing to engage.
Coming in, I thought, oh, well, here, I'm global. I've traveled the world. I've worked for tour companies. I know about diversity. I know about accepting people. But I think it's still you start coming around the table and hearing the stories, and then you realize, wait a minute, I don't know that. I don't know as much as I think I know. So I myself need to be more understanding, more accepting of, and diversity isn't just racial issues. It can be, in the classroom we have students with cognitive disabilities or different disabilities that, okay, that's a diversity in itself. So it's not just looking at the cultural aspect.
It has caused me to have a lot of self-reflection about how I approach things, and that is a great experience to have, and that I don't think anyone should ever feel like they are confident in how they view the world and perceive the world, and to always reflect on one's own assumptions, inhibitions.
So in listening and appreciating the experiences that each one has had, I think it has helped us go a step closer to wanting to bring up these types of topics within a classroom learning environment, to see if we share some of our experiences, maybe now students are going to feel safe to say, yes, I had an encounter like that.
I think this response is twofold. First, my students need to understand the importance of teaching a worldly, diverse, multicultural art curriculum. And secondly, my students need to be able to teach to the needs of their entire class, to teach to the student who has autism, to teach to the Hmong student, the Jewish student, the gay student, and treat them all equally, but yet embrace these differences as the teacher, but also as a community member within that class.
eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. Norman MacLean.